Well, kia ora, and welcome to a mini hoon here on the Kaka. I'm Bernard Hickey with Bonnie Robinson, who is the Director of the Salvation Army's Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit in Wellington, who has just helped coordinate the publication of the Salvation Army's State of the Nation report for 2026. Bonnie, lovely to have you on the hoon.
Thanks very much for having me.
So, firstly, for those people who haven't heard of the State of the Nation report, what's it about? What are you trying to achieve?
Well, this is the 19th State of the Nation report, so we've been producing these for 19 years. I guess the origins of it and what is still important today is there's a lot of information out there around GDP and other economic figures. Less so information about our social well-being, how are we actually going as a nation in terms of our well-being, our gelling together, people having a life in which they flourish and do well. And so we wanted to bring together the data that can kind of track and look at how are we going in our social well-being. So what the report does is it takes publicly available information. So most of this information is out there on various government websites. Some of it we get through Official Information Act requests, and a little tiny bit is from within the Salvation Army, but most of it's out there. It's just most people haven't got the time or maybe the statistical skill to go and dive into it and then try and work out what it means. So we try and bring that all together into one place, try and do a bit of analysis about what is this telling us about our social well-being, and making it a resource for people who might be making decisions or needing to make decisions that might impact on our social well-being, and also for the public to kind of get this information and go, how are we going? And the advantage of having done it for a long time is that we generally look back 5 years in each report. And so we can see trends over time, which is really important in a lot of these stats, because year by year, often there's very little movement, but when you look back over time, you can see whether things are getting better, generally worse, or staying the same.
So what are the trends that stand out in the 2026 report?
So this year, unfortunately, a lot of things have got worse. Some things have got better and a few things have stayed the same. But in general, a lot of the statistics are heading in the direction we don't want them to head. So just to pull out some examples, because we do 26 indicators, so we'd be here a long time if we talked about all of them, but child poverty and material hardship, for example, that's heading in the wrong direction. So we had a couple of years there, about 2 or 3 years ago, where we were starting to see those improve. But now it looks like the trend is it's getting worse again. So we've got more children in material hardship, more children living around poverty levels than we have had. So that's not a great statistic. And I think that's one to come back to, because it doesn't just affect now, but it affects our future a lot as well.
Why do you think that there has been that deterioration in the last couple of years? Are there any particular reasons in the economic environment or policy news, or what do you think is going on here?
Well, what's fairly clear is that, everyone's been impacted by the recession, and we have had 2 years of recession, but those who have been very significantly impacted were those who had the least to start with, who had the least income resilience, maybe the least resilience overall. And what's really clear from the statistics is that they have done it very tough, and they continue to do it tough. And so it's things like we've seen more people go onto, more families onto welfare benefits because we've had unemployment go up. At the same time as some of the emergency assistance and the hardship assistance that is available has been reduced. So we've got more need, but less assistance available through the welfare system to meet that need. Then the housing situation, although housing supply has improved and social housing has improved a bit, that's also starting to slow. So we've still got 19,000 people on the housing register who are needing a safe, dry, affordable home. So you put all these things together, and our lowest income families have definitely been doing it very tough. And for some, I think, who were on the edge, so we measure material hardship and we look at people who say, I've got not enough for the basics, and people who've got just enough. I think people who had just enough have been slipping into not enough. So it's never one thing, it's a number of things. But, I think those put together mean we are seeing that trend for child poverty starting to get worse again.
What about the domestic violence situation, which appears to have worsened substantially in the last year or so?
Yes, unfortunately, that has got dramatically worse, which is interesting because violent crime overall is declining, which is good news, and probably surprises people. But in actual fact, it has, along with youth offending, which is also down. But our rate of family violence is continuing to increase. And also, I think the rate of hospitalisations of children from assault and abuse and neglect is continuing to increase. And I mean, this is a long-standing problem in New Zealand. We have a long-standing problem with family violence. But I think, again, the pressures on family, it doesn't excuse family violence, but it can explain it. That when families come under more and more pressure, then sometimes that does result in unfortunately family violence occurring, and also that people may not be as able to reach out for support when they've got so many kind of practical day-to-day pressures, such as where's dinner coming from. When worrying about where dinner is coming from is an everyday thing, you maybe don't have the space in your life to look at other things, such as what's going on in your family in terms of, family violence.
Just looking now at the housing indicators, I have a housing theory of everything, that the unaffordability and often the poor quality of our housing stock has worsened or is the source of many of our economic, social, political issues that we have. And when you scrape the surface of just about anything, it often comes back to housing. What's your view of the current housing situation and what that means for the state of the nation?
Well, what we found in the report is that housing remains a significant barrier to well-being for many people. Yes, there's been some increase in supply. Yes, there's been a bit more social housing built, but that's slowed. And we still have those large numbers on the social housing register. So it is a big issue. I mean, I like to say there isn't a silver bullet in social well-being and social issues. But if there was, I think it would look like a warm, dry, affordable house. Because we know that if people have a warm, dry, secure, affordable house, then it's a lot easier for people to deal with everything else that might be happening in their life. But if you don't have housing, then it's just really difficult for people to have the sort of stability and security that they need to then deal with other things. I mean, if you don't have housing, it makes everything hard. It makes finding a job hard. It makes sending the kids to school hard. It makes making ends meet and providing healthy kai hard. So it's a range of things that cause well-being, but without housing, it's very, very difficult for people. And so we have seen, although we've seen the supply of emergency housing grants basically plummet, because the government was, rightly concerned about people in motels, etc. The difficulty is that has left some people without options, and what we are seeing is a rise in street homelessness. The Auckland count, for example, in the last 12 months was double what it had been the previous year. So it's great that some people have been moved out of emergency accommodation into social housing, but some people have not, and some people who have lost their housing now are finding it very hard to get emergency assistance, and it leaves them basically with no options. And in that environment, nothing else is going to be worked on until they're in secure housing.
Yeah. I'm also curious about energy and food poverty. After the housing poverty, then after you've paid the rent, you've got to then buy the food, and if you've got any left over, pay the power bill. Both food and electricity prices have risen faster than the rest of the consumer price index basket in the last, certainly the last 3 or 4 years, and for electricity, the last 20 years. What's the story? What are you seeing there in terms of food and energy poverty?
Yeah, I think particularly food poverty. So the Salvation Army gave out 90,000 food parcels in the last 12 months. That is a decline from the peak of COVID years, but it's still 50% higher than pre-COVID. So during COVID, I think what happened was a lot of people came under enormous pressure financially, but that hasn't eased back to pre-COVID levels. So we still have a very large number of families who cannot securely know that they are going to put food on the table every day, and they're reliant on food banks for that. And I mean, one of the issues is that the emergency assistance for food that you can get from our welfare system has not been reviewed in terms of its level for a very long time. A lot of our, sort of extra assistance hasn't had its levels reviewed, so food's gone up dramatically, but the amount you can get to help you with that hasn't gone up to the same level. And so people are increasingly reliant on food banks to meet their needs. But we also see working people coming for food parcels as well. It's not just people on benefits. Our lowest paid workers in the economy, they got sort of roughly about an 11 cent per hour increase, whereas our highest paid people got about a $4 an hour increase. So, and, if you think of the rate of inflation, an 11 cent per hour increase is not going to keep you up with the rate of food inflation. So people's incomes, even if they're in employment, have just not been keeping pace with the cost of food. Power is a bit more hidden. I think you see the power poverty in the food bank line because people will pay the power bill and then realise they don't have enough money to buy food for the week. So we don't get people presenting so much directly with, I can't pay my power bill. We more get people presenting at our centres saying, I haven't got enough money for food. And when you sit down and talk to people, it's the cost of their rent and it's the cost of power. And they've paid those bills because you have to, otherwise, you're homeless or you sit in the dark. But then there's nothing left for other things. And people are paying, 30, even with rent stabilising at the low income level, people are still paying 30, 40% or perhaps more of their income on rent. And it really doesn't leave enough to fully cover all your other bills.
Yeah, and just in summary then, so some of the indicators have gotten worse, particularly around domestic violence. There's obviously a big issue with housing affordability. Looks like a worsening, at least over the last 4 or 5 years, in food poverty, which is connected to electricity poverty. What sort of policy changes do you think might improve things here?
Well, a lot of the research suggests that, particularly for low income households, what people need is direct income assistance that they can rely on, that's going to come in every week, fortnight, month, however it's paid, and that they can rely on that and then plan their budget around that. We at Salvation Army are a provider of what's called financial mentoring, now it used to be called budget advice. And, a lot of people who come for budget advice, they're actually pretty good managers. Their income isn't sufficient. And it's quite hard often to find, those places where they could trim back or do something differently. So the research does suggest that those income transfers that are, for most families, that are reliable, that people know are coming, and they can use that to meet their basic needs is what many people need. Some people need further wraparound support because their life is complex, and paying them more money alone won't resolve their issues. But for a lot of people, an income that is livable, that they can rely on, that's what they need. So we need to look at, how are we supporting our low income households, and particularly our households with children, and is that sufficient to bring people out of hardship, out of material hardship, above the poverty line, where people can at least reliably know they will meet their basic needs, and then we also need the other supports around, that go with that. So we need the housing. We need to continue to build housing so that we don't have the big wait list, because as we've discussed, if your housing is unaffordable, it's pretty hard to for people to make any change that's going to be significant if that's not there. So we need it across the board, but housing, incomes, and then to ensure that where people's lives have got complex and difficult, that there are the wraparound supports to help people with that, because life can be very difficult for people, and when they're in financially difficult situations or housing poverty, etc., those life things compound, and it sometimes takes support for people to get back on track. But certainly, if you can know that you can feed your family, pay the rent, be secure in where you live, that's a really good start for well-being.
So we did actually see an improvement in some measures through 2020 to 2023, potentially because of significant rises in the minimum wage, as well as increases in some of the core benefits. But things have not improved, and some of them have gotten worse through 2024 and 2025. The State of the Nation report, it's the sort of thing that should be on the agenda of a cabinet meeting. Let's say you were invited into that cabinet meeting to talk about the State of the Nation, and the cabinet ministers are asking, what should we do if we wanted to improve some of these things? What sort of recommendations would you give?
Oh, well, it would be lovely to be invited into a cabinet meeting. The State of the Nation report quite deliberately doesn't actually have policy recommendations. One of the reasons for that is that we try to sort of make it a fairly objective analysis of the data. But as I was saying, I think there's plenty of research out there on what the solutions are. And I think what we need is urgent action. So if I had the opportunity, I wouldn't necessarily be telling them exactly what to do, but I think I'd be saying we need urgent action, particularly around child poverty. And because we know that any time spent in poverty and material hardship as a child, even if your life later on takes a better trajectory, it can still leave trauma, and it can mar your life for the rest of your life. So I think that's urgent. I mean, those child poverty stats have been there for a long time. We've had little dips, tiny little dips, some improvements, but now we're heading in the wrong directory. And it is like, at what point do we say we're just not going to accept this as a nation anymore, and we are going to do, what it takes to shift the dial on child poverty? And children can't wait. They can't wait for, the recession to be over or the economy to suddenly, boom. And they are affected now, and that impact will have a lasting effect. So we need to be doing what is it that we can do right now that will really have an impact on those child poverty stats. Because if we don't, we will see the cost of that in the future. We'll see it in our health system. We'll see it in our criminal justice system. So, let's put some resource in now rather than later.
The government's approach since it got elected, really, and in arguing to get elected, is what we need to do is focus on getting economic growth. It's all about growth, growth, growth. Clear the decks, make the boat go faster, and that will solve all the problems, because a faster growing economy will lift the tide, and everyone will rise with the tide of economic growth. What's your view on that approach to solving the issues?
Well, not an economist, but I do sometimes like to say, the rising tide lifts all boats, but you need a boat in the first place. So, we see at our centres in the Salvation Army, probably the people who don't have a boat, what we see is that how obviously growth, in the economy, we're good to come out of recession, but how is that benefit going to be shared across everyone? It looks from the data like even the little bits of improvement that have been, those on the lowest incomes have been getting the least share of that. So, for example, as I said, people have had pay rises, but down the low end, it's been quite small. So how are we going to share if we do improve? How is the share of that going to be, and will that actually lift the people who are at the low income end out of poverty or not? And sometimes that actually takes some deliberate decisions about how we're going to do that, how we're going to make sure that happens. It doesn't necessarily just automatically happen. And, we need to be really aware of the fact that people can, through no fault of their own, just get left behind. So, yes, great to be going for growth, but how are you going to make sure that actually gets to the people who have the greatest need?
Bonnie Robinson, who is the director of the Salvation Army's Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit in Wellington, talking there about the release today of the State of the Nation report for 2026. Thank you very much, Ngā mihi nui, Bonnie Robinson.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks.